Hey people, welcome back to the channel. This is a story in which Naruto is a prodigy and is very similar to his father Minato. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. Leave a comment if you want to suggest fanfic. Check the description for credits and support the creator of the story. So let us begin. Chapter 1 Naruto Uzumaki was not a normal boy by any means. Naruto Uzumaki wasn't your run-of-the-mill orphan. He was, as every orphan was, without a parent. He was, as every orphan was, lonely. He was, as every orphan was, sad. He wasn't, as almost every orphan was, looked at with pity and kindness, however. No, Naruto Uzumaki was looked at with disdain and hatred. Simply walking down the streets incurred several cruel beatings. He had no idea why, but the entire population of Konohagakure no Sato seemed to hate him. He had very few precious people. In fact, the only ones he could name of the top of his head were Hiruzen Sarutobi, or as he had dubbed the Hokage, Gigi, Ayame, a girl who helped her father run a nearby ramen shop, and Toiki, the father of said girl. It was sad actually, a boy his age, 5, being hated by everyone. Naruto had learnt this early on in life. He was hated in the orphanage he lived in as well. Ever since he learnt to walk on his own, the matron of the orphanage started treating him like trash. He was not allowed to play with the children of his age, and even when he managed to talk to them, they would sneer at him and told him, in no uncertain words, that a monster like him was not welcome in their group. He would get sad and then leave. Walking the streets of the village was like trial by fire for him. He had to take careful measures to remain as unnoticeable as possible. If he got noticed, a civilian would point at him, shouting to others, "The demon is here. Get him." He would then run for his life, entering lanes and alleys, taking a shortcut through a shop, entering from the front door and exiting from the back, anything to escape the beatings. But it was suspicious that a 4-year-old boy was able to escape from the mobs. What no one, including Naruto, knew that Naruto had some special quirks. Naruto had an eidetic memory, the ability to remember and recall anything he sees or hear once, in great detail. Naruto loved to read books, but didn't know why he could recall every page of the book, down to the exact words. He found it very useful and abused it shamelessly, reading all the books he was allowed to and then some, without telling anyone of course. He didn't tell this to anybody, not even Gigi, fearing if this got out, he would get beaten for having freakish traits. But he also discovered the downside of having such an ability. One day, when running from a mob, he accidentally entered an alley which had a dead end. There was no escape for him that day. He was punched, kicked on every part of his body, until he fell unconscious. When he woke up, very mysteriously, in his room at the orphanage, healed up, he was very happy he did not die. However, when he tried to sleep that night, the beatings came back in full force in the form of nightmares. Because of his ability, he experienced the beatings down to the last detail. He couldn't sleep peacefully for several nights. Another one of his quirks was a sort of sensory ability. He could sense danger if it was coming to him. However, it was a subconscious ability of sorts, activating only when he was in danger. But it was very useful in avoiding punches and stones that came when his back was turned. The village's behavior in general towards Naruto caused him to develop a need for positive attention, but also a need to avoid people, preferring to keep to himself. He would not actively seek attention, but he would latch on like a leech to anyone who gave some form of caring to him. Sadly, the number of people who did could be counted on one hand. That was the reason he turned to books. At least they didn't attack him outright and allowed him to read them. Almost no one wanted to associate with him, leading him to take refuge in books. They became his best friends, always making him smile when he learnt something new. Naruto had to force himself to learn reading and writing as the teachers at the orphanage did as less as they could to help him. They would simply thrust the books in hands, and go away to help other children. He learnt early not to ask questions, receiving physical punishment whenever he did. He had read about various topics, but the one thing that stood out to him was the topic of Hokage. How the Hokage was the most powerful shinobi in the village and was responsible for the village's safety. He read how powerful was the Shodai Hokage, with his unique Kekkei Genkai bloodline limit of Mokuden, the wood release. He was said to be the most powerful shinobi of his time, known as Shinobi no Kami, the god of shinobi. Hashirama Senju, along with Madara Uchiha, were the two main founders of Konoha. Ironically, both were also bitter enemies, with Hashirama having to kill Madara to protect the village. The Nadaime Hokage, Tobarama Senju, was the younger brother of Hashirama. He was and is still hailed as the most powerful Suiton water release user of all time. He was also hailed the fastest shinobi of his time, having created the famous Hiraishin no Jutsu. He was the one who started the Ninja Academy. Naruto took a liking to him as he loved anything that was even remotely associated with speed. The Sandaime Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, that was his Jiji, was known as the Professor, because he could use all the nature transformations and had the unsurpassed knowledge of ninjutsu, knowing all the techniques in Konoha, save for clan techniques. He also shared the title of Shinobi no Kami with Hashirama, because in his prime he was the strongest of all Kages. Naruto was astounded how powerful was the man he called his Jiji. Sarutobi was also the sensei of the Densetsu no Sannin, the three legendary ninjas, who were among the most powerful shinobi in the world. The Yondaime Hokage was the one who became his favorite to the point that Naruto considered him as his idol, aspiring to be like him. Minato Namikaze, when he was alive, was considered the strongest of the Hokages and arguably, the most dangerous man to have graced the world of shinobi. Known as Konoha no Kuroi Senko, he was also considered the fastest shinobi to have ever lived. He was famous because he took the Hiraishin no Jutsu, the jutsu used by the Nadaime, to levels unheard of. He was the one who single-handedly ended the Third Great Shinobi War, finishing of 1,000 Iwa shinobi by himself, in the Battle of Kanobi Bridge. Naruto also took note that the Yondaime suspiciously looked very much like him if he grew up. Naruto compared their physical traits, more specifically those that stood out the most. They were both blonde, the hair color being near identical, with Naruto's a shade brighter. But the eyes were what took him by surprise. Those azure blue shades were what he had as well, looking back at him in the mirror every day. He became even more suspicious. During one of his outings, when his Jiji came to take him to the Ichiraku ramen that he loved so much, he asked him what it meant to be Hokage. Flashback: the old man stopped eating and looked at him, his eyes piercing him as if searching for something. He then smiled and said, "Perhaps you should ask me first, Naruto-kun, that what does it mean to be a shinobi?" Naruto looked surprised for a moment but recovered and asked, "What does it mean to be a shinobi?" This time Jiji answered, "To be a shinobi means to endure. A shinobi is one who can follow or lead others into any darkness and work together to overcome that darkness and make it out the other side. A shinobi walks towards danger when everyone else is running away. That is because it is the duty of a shinobi to look at any foe and simply say, 'Bring it.' That is because shinobi exist to protect those who can't protect themselves." Naruto had a look of wonder on his face. He had no idea Jiji was that wise. An answer like that changed Naruto's entire view of shinobi. At first he thought that being a shinobi only meant performing cool jutsus and fighting in the name of your village. He had no idea the answer would be this deep in meaning. Sarutobi looked at Naruto and mentally smiled. He knew about Naruto's treatment by the villagers and his drive to be Hokage. He mused, perhaps I can give him a little insight on what being a Hokage means. Naruto recovered from his wonder and stared at his empty bowl, deep in thought. If this is what being a shinobi meant, then he had a pretty good idea on what being a Hokage meant. He was snapped out of his thoughts when Jiji said, "Now that that answer is out of the way, I can tell you what being a Hokage, I know Jiji." Those words stopped Hiruzen in his tracks, his head tilting in curiosity. "You know what, Naruto-kun?" Naruto looked up, understanding and respect in his eyes. Hiruzen was touched at the respect he was receiving from Naruto, but his curiosity was increasing. What being a Hokage means? Hiruzen stared at him, silently asking him to continue. Naruto spoke up, "The Hokage is responsible for everything in this village. It's his responsibility to protect everyone here, and to make sure they are safe and happy with their village. He tends to the finances of this village, the rules, the daily events, everything. He controls every single ninja who bears a leaf headband, and basically directs when they live and die. This job is not for the faint of heart, and only for someone who loves this village deeply." At the end of his answer, he was staring back at his bowl. Hiruzen was shocked at the understanding Naruto showed of the position of Hokage. He had no idea that Naruto was this perceptive and knowledgeable. Toiki and Ayame had stopped working as well, staring at the blonde with wide eyes along with the Hokage. It was simply unheard of, a 5-year-old showing such a deep understanding of something most people don't understand until much later in life. Hiruzen was shocked so much that he didn't notice his jaw was hanging a bit. Such a deep perception and insight at such a young age, he thought with wonder. Only one person had showed such understanding like this, and he too was 3 years older. Itachi Uchiha was a prodigy among the likes of Kakashi Hatake and Minato Namikaze. Such a shame he was now a missing nin. Naruto looked up when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Gigi was looking at him with a strange expression. That is exactly what being Hokage means, Naruto-kun. A challenging smile broke out on Naruto's face and he declared, "Then I will become Hokage someday, Gigi. And not just any Hokage. I will be the strongest there will be." Hiruzen chuckled, which soon turned to laughter. The father and daughter on the other side of the counter were also smiling fondly. Naruto frowned. "What? I am serious." He was a little hurt that Gigi saw his declaration as a joke. Hiruzen soon calmed down, smiling fondly at the boy. He remembered another Uzumaki who used to say the same thing. But he had a strong feeling that Naruto would be right. He ruffled Naruto's head. "I know Naruto-kun, I have no doubt you will." Flashback end. Ever since that day, Naruto studied even more rigorously and beginning physical training as well. Granted, a 4-year-old such as him could not do much, but he did his best. He ran 4 rounds around the village, did every exercise he could think of and practiced his kunai and shurikenjutsu. He took those weapons by sneaking into the practice grounds and collecting them. To his surprise, the art of throwing shuriken and kunai came very naturally to him. He started throwing after taking a book about weapons left behind on a training ground. He had shaken his head at the disrespect shown to the book, but took it with him anyway. Just 2 weeks of practice and he was throwing all bullseyes. That was not the only surprising thing. He had found that he could recover very quickly from physical exhaustion and wear and tear on his muscles. He recalled that he recovered surprisingly quickly after the beating from the villagers. A bloodline perhaps. He didn't dwell on it further, but filed it away for later. But today was special. So special that he would have to take extra measures in staying safe. Because today was his birthday, and he was just kicked out of the orphanage. Roaming in the streets, he suspected what would happen in the evening. Today was the day the villagers celebrated as the Kyuubi festival, the day the Yondaime defeated the Kyuubi and the day he would be beaten within an inch of his life or hunted and possibly killed. An epiphany struck him like lightning, causing him to suddenly stop in middle of the street. Yondaime. Kyuubi's defeat, treatment of the villagers, Demon Boy, Gigi's avoidance of the topic. No, he wouldn't. Naruto ran from the street, meandering between people with the grace of a seasoned dancer or flowing water. He ran like it was no one's business, reaching his favorite spot, the head of the Yondaime, in record time. Anyone who saw him had flashbacks of another blonde running like a man possessed. I need to confirm whether it's true or not, he thought grimly, afraid of what he would find. He sat down on the head of the famed Hokage in a meditative posture and reached within, or rather, spoke within. Kyuubi, if you are inside me, I want to meet you, please. For a full 5 minutes there was no reply and Naruto was beginning to relax when something pulled on his mind. Naruto opened his eyes to find himself in a dark corridor. He narrowed his eyes. Is this my mindscape? He thought in disgust as he walked forward. He kept walking for a few minutes and stopped, seeing some light at the end of the corridor. It seemed to pull him towards it. Time to find out what is at the end. With that thought, he walked again, stopping only until the end. It was a huge room, so large and vast it was that the ceiling was impossible to find. He looked around, his eyes seeing black stone and nothing more. But the elephant in the room was a large iron-barred door, with a paper on it that said seal. He gazed at the piece of paper, resignation written in his eyes. His azure eyes looked past the cage, looking for what he knew was in the cage. He was just waiting for the Kyuubi to open his eyes. Based on what he had read, Kyuubi was a being of pure hatred and evil. A mindless beast capable of destruction on a scale hitherto undreamt of. But Naruto was skeptical when he read that. He might get to see it for himself now. A growl sounded from the cage, sending a breath of hot air in Naruto's face. Naruto steeled himself, in spite of the cage separating him from the beast within. An enormous red eye opened, causing Naruto to tense up. The eye looked at him, as if evaluating him. The eye then started to rise, causing Naruto to look up at the massive form. The Kyuubi had orange, silky-looking fur, with black markings around his eyes connected to his, funnily enough, rabbit-like ears. The upper body was humanoid, including the hands. The lower body was just like a fox, barring the 9 long swaying tails in the back. Fire was the closest thing they looked like. The red, slitted eyes looked him closely with a hint of malice. Naruto spoke first. "Thank you for answering my call, Kyuubi," he said with a nod. If Kyuubi was surprised, he didn't show it. Inside, however, he was mighty shocked. This was not the first thing he expected his jailer to say. He expected him to look at him with fear, asking whether he really was the Kyuubi, following with the denial of the possibility. He did expect him to thank him at all. He replied, "Think nothing of it. I'm surprised though, that you were able to figure it out so quickly." "Why aren't you surprised?" he asked with curiosity. Naruto sat down in front of the cage, which surprised the great Biju further. Naruto was showing that he was willing to relax in front of him. "Well, I was, for a few moments at least. But it wasn't that difficult to figure out. It is easy to create a plausible theory once you have all the relevant facts," he said, never breaking eye contact with the Kyuubi. Kyuubi raised a massive eyebrow, silently impressed with his host. His thought processes were very intelligent for someone who was only 5 years old. He was bold as well, bold enough to maintain eye contact with him. He also could not sense any fear from the boy. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he asked him. Without a moment of hesitance, Naruto answered, "Because you are misunderstood." This time surprise was visible on Kyuubi's face, which was quickly followed by anger. "What did you just say? Choose your next words very carefully," he growled out. Naruto wasted no time in answering. "In all the books I have read, they described you as a being of pure hatred. But that is only a one-sided understanding, isn't it?" he asked with a sad smile. Before Kyuubi could answer, Naruto continued, "Humans fear what they can't understand. The foremost aspect of your personality that they have seen is hatred, which, while a big part of you, conceals the being underneath that can feel emotions just like us. Isn't that right, Kyuubi?" Kyuubi was astounded at the amount of understanding his host showed towards him. Perhaps he could. "What do you want?" Naruto looked at him with his azure blues, reminding Kyuubi of another set of blues that looked at him fearlessly before sealing him. "If you wouldn't mind," a hesitant smile appeared on Naruto's face, "would you be my friend?" Kyuubi was truly stupefied at the request. For the first time, in centuries of his existence, someone had asked if they could be his friend. Naruto saw that the Kyuubi was surprised, and for the Kyuubi, if Naruto's request was not surprising enough, he was totally blown away by what Naruto did next. Naruto got up from his spot and walked into the cage. He walked up close and offered a hand for him to take. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and it is nice to meet you." Kyuubi had abandoned all signs of remaining composed and was openly gaping at Naruto. But he composed himself quickly and gave a sincere smile to Naruto. Seeing Naruto was too small to even shake his finger, he extended his index nail to him. "My name is Kurama. Nice to meet you too, Naruto." Chapter 2 Naruto smiled. "You have a very nice name, Kurama." The newly dubbed Kurama smiled. "Thank you. It means a lot coming from someone whose name means fish cake." Kurama smirked at the end, intentionally making the jab at Naruto's name to see if he could rile the boy up. His success was only minuscule though. Naruto only had a tiny frown on his face, instead of the full-blown childish rage Kurama was expecting. "Actually, I prefer the other meaning of my name. Maelstrom is much better than being compared to a fish cake, Kurama." Kurama chuckled, a smooth, deep baritone that lit up a warm feeling inside Naruto. Naruto decided he liked Kurama's voice. "No one would think of a maelstrom when they look at you, Naruto. Perhaps when you are older, but certainly not now," Kurama teased him. Naruto shrugged, and then his eyes turned serious, making Kurama do the same. Naruto asked the Biju, "Kurama, you know I have questions, right?" Kurama nodded. "I assumed as such. However, I had expected us to meet when you were significantly older." I have to say, I was not expecting your call to me. Naruto shook his head. Well, if it makes you feel better, I was not expecting you to pull me inside my mind, he said, absently noting that he was not wet at all, in spite of standing and sitting in the water. Kurama returned to his earlier position, lying down, face on his paws, hands. I will do my best to answer whatever question you have, Naruto, he assured him. Naruto gave him a nod of gratitude and sat down as well. Okay, first question. Why does my mindscape represent a gutter or a sewer, whatever you want to call it? Kurama looked silent for a moment, after which a mischievous grin broke out on his face, exposing his sharp canines. You know what they say about people whose minds are in the gutter, right? Naruto gave him a blank look, reminding Kurama that Naruto, however intelligent for his age, was still only 5 years old. Kurama's embarrassed blush would have been visible on his face if his fur were not orange. He cleared his throat loudly to avoid embarrassment. Sorry Naruto, but I have no idea why your mindscape is a sewer. There is a theory that says that your mindscape is a reflection of your mental state. It could have been the psychological trauma that was given to you by the villagers, but why it is particularly a sewer, I don't know, he replied. Naruto absorbed the information like a sponge and after a few seconds, he asked Kurama, so, I have psychological trauma. I knew about that. Which means that even if I change the appearance of my mindscape to something else, there will always be something that represents the trauma, right? Kurama inclined his head in agreement, smiling a little, that's right. I have to say though, it's nice to talk to someone who is intelligent. Naruto's eyes visibly brightened up at the praise, giving a full-blown smile to his newest friend. Kurama noted with some amusement the grin looked very similar to his own in a redhead. Naruto jumped to his feet. Your answer just confirmed something for me, Kurama. His eyes had a mix of excitement and determination to them, as if he was about to do something new. Naruto closed his eyes and clapped his hands together, face scrunched up in concentration. Kurama observed him quietly, wondering what his host was about to do. Naruto snapped his eyes open after a few minutes, having envisioned what he was about to do. With a cry of, ha! He slammed his right hand on the ground. What happened next completely blew away his mind. A wave of energy exploded from Naruto in all the directions, completely lighting up the mindscape and almost blinding Kurama. Was it chakra that exploded from him? How is that even possible when he hasn't even unlocked it yet? That pulse of chakra completely shredded everything it came in contact with. Naruto may have possibly destroyed his own mind, were the thought running through Kurama's head. When he opened his eyes, however, he was stupefied to a degree he didn't think was possible. His eyes were wide, his jaw was hanging, making him look quite comical. A beautiful valley greeted his eyes. Grounds that were lush and a shade of green that looked heavenly, streams with water clearer than he had ever seen. The grass felt soft under his limbs and there was a massive oak tree with a shade that made it great for naps. The cage around him had disappeared, instead replaced with a collar which had the same piece of paper from before with the kanji for seal written on it. He looked at Naruto in wonder. This kid was a package of one surprise after another. Naruto got up from his position, looking no worse for wear. He smiled satisfactorily. This is so much better than before. Wouldn't you agree, Kurama? He asked, turning to him. Kurama was smiling like he was the happiest being on earth. No one had ever done anything for him, and Naruto, who had just met him, had already done so much for him. Kurama looked at Naruto with gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, Naruto. You have no idea how much this means to me. Naruto just shook his head at him. Don't worry about it. We are friends, right? Kurama nodded, feeling excitement in a long time, wanting to explore what Naruto had created for him. He was about to leave when Naruto's voice stopped him, mid-step. However, it seemed strange that there is no presence of a celestial body in the sky. I had envisioned it just like outside, he mused, a frown on his 5-year-old face that would have earned him so many squeals of kawaii from girls. Kurama too wondered what the reason could be, and quickly figured it out. He looked up in thought. Perhaps it is because of the seal, he muttered. Naruto looked up at him, confusion written clear on his face. What do you mean? Kurama looked down at Naruto. The seal that keeps me inside you, Naruto. If it was only you, you would have had absolute control over your mindscape. But since I am here as well, the control gets divided equally. However, control on my side is restricted because of this seal. The absence of the sun or the moon that you envisioned could signify that this place is cut off from my senses. In easier terms, the outside world, he explained. Naruto processed Kurama's answer. If the seal was restricting Kurama's activity. What do you propose I should do, Kurama? Kurama put his hand under his chin. He could see only one way around this, and if Naruto messed up, it could spell trouble for both of them. But he would try his best to not let that happen. You would have to tear off a very small piece of paper on my collar. Leave the rest to me, Kurama assured him. When Naruto looked a bit hesitant, Kurama told him, don't worry Naruto. You can do it. If something goes wrong, I will take care of it. The reassurance erased any doubt from Naruto's face and he promptly marched up to Kurama's collar, making sure to tear only the smallest piece of paper. Kurama nodded in satisfaction and approval. He could feel a tiny bit of control get back to him. Just a snap of his fingers and a sun appeared in the sky, lighting up the valley, making it even more beautiful. Naruto smiled at the sight, but it faded at the sight of a cave that he instinctively knew not to go near. He turned back to Kurama, who had an expression of curiosity on his face. Naruto, what was that wave of energy that exploded from you earlier? And how did you know how to change your mindscape? Naruto gave him an innocent look. It is my mind, Kurama. I can make anything happen in here. As for the energy wave, his expression turned sheepish and he rubbed the back of his head, reminding him of the boy's mother who had the same habit. It just seemed cooler than simply changing the surroundings in the blink of an eye. This time it was Kurama who gave him a blank look. A sweat drop appeared on the side of his head at the sheepish laugh of his host. He shook his head. It seemed Naruto liked to be a dramatic smartass. He concentrated and nodded in satisfaction. He could now sense chakra signatures of almost the whole village. Once Naruto opened his eyes, Kurama would be able to see as well. Nevertheless, you have my thanks. Allow me to repay with something that will come in very handy once you become a shinobi. Kurama smiled, raising a fingernail and very gently touching Naruto's forehead. The nail shined for a moment and then faded back. Naruto raised an eyebrow. What was that? Kurama smiled mysteriously. Why don't you discover it yourself? I can feel several chakra signatures closing in on you. Time for you to open your eyes, Naruto. Naruto nodded and turned to leave, but froze. He slowly turned around and smiled embarrassedly. How do I leave? Kurama had to squash the urge to facepalm. It seemed that Naruto had his moments of stupidity every now and then. Just jump into the water, fishcake, he said exasperatedly. Naruto frowned at fishcake, but nodded and with a leap that was impossible for any child his age, jumped into the water. Kurama shook his head, amused. It was only because Naruto was in his own mind that he was able to do so. Perhaps I should have told him that he could get out with just a thought, he mused. Then he removed that thought immediately. Nah, it's too much fun messing with him. XXXXXXX Naruto opened his eyes slowly, without a hurry. He was thinking about what gift did Kurama give him when he felt it. Like something, no someone was coming his way. He slowly turned his head around, face paling at the sight. Dozens of people, knives, clubs, crowbars in hand, excited expressions on their faces, shouting, today is the day you die, demon. We will finish what the Yondaime started, and we will avenge him. Naruto's expression had turned utterly horrified. There was only one way to get off the monument without falling splat on the pavement. Outrun and outmaneuver the mob. He wasted no time. He kipped up to his feet and immediately started running in a perpendicular direction to the mob. Since he had been running regularly for 1 year, he had built up some pretty good speed and endurance. His plan was to take a wide arc around the mob and as soon as it was behind him, hightail it into the streets where he could lose them. He took off into the forest, the mob following him closely behind. As he began to cut an arc around the mob, hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a clear sign of danger. However, unlike before when he could only detect danger, this time he could feel the direction the weapon was coming from. Naruto was an imaginative child. From where he had developed his imagination, no one knew. But there was one thing about his imagination that even he knew was not normal. His body had the most unnatural and peculiar ability of following the commands of his mind down to a T. As soon as he had sensed the knives speeding at him, He thought of only one escape scenario, and his body followed it as it did before several times, just not in a life and death scenario. He jumped, body in the air, rotating like a screwdriver, the knives going under him, missing him by just a few inches. He rolled on the ground to soften his landing, and continued running away, successfully getting the mob behind him and the road in front of him. He managed to get to the streets, where he purposefully chose the market street where he could lose them. He knew the civilians could not do the tricks that he could. He vaulted neatly over several carts without losing momentum, each time increasing the gap between him and the mob. He turned left at an intersection, and jumped up a wall, hanging on the other side until he was sure the sounds of the mob faded away. He jumped back on the road. He took a moment to catch a breath. If he was not mistaken, he had run at full speed for close to 3 miles. Impressive for a 5-year-old, the familiar voice of Kurama sounded in his head. Naruto looked surprised for a moment, but then shook his head. It was probably because of the change that he had done to the seal. He also chalked it up to adrenaline that he had run so far and fast. That was a lot difficult than he had imagined, but he blamed it on his clothes. An orange jumpsuit stuck out like a sore thumb among the masses. It was as if he had stuck a piece of paper behind his back saying, "Kill me." The blonde hair wasn't helping either. But then again, he had nothing else to wear. The keepers at the orphanage looked very satisfied when they had given him the jumpsuit. They probably wanted him to be spotted in case he attempted to hide from a mob. Too bad they underestimated him. So deep he was in his musings that he didn't notice he had entered an area of Konoha no one had taken a stroll in for at least 5 years. He looked when he saw he was standing before the gates of a beautiful mansion. Naruto, open the gates of the mansion. Let's explore. Kurama's excited voice sounded in his head. Naruto shook his head. I would be an idiot to even touch the gate. Can't you see all the seals engraved on it? Kurama insisted. Do it. Who knows, you might get a surprise. Naruto frowned at the behavior of the fox, but followed his advice anyway. He placed his hand on the seal of the gate and closed his eyes, as if waiting to be blown up. He didn't notice the seals glow slightly. He opened his eyes when nothing happened. Tentatively, he pushed the gate and to his surprise, it opened easily. The seals must be malfunctioning if a strange like me could enter in here, he thought. The mansion was beautiful. It was a traditional 2-story mansion, surrounded by lush, green grounds. There was even a small pond with clear water in front of the house. Whoever this house belongs to must be insanely wealthy, he thought with wonder. Money was something that was rarely available to him. He decided not to dwell on it further. As he approached the front door, he began to think it was a bad idea coming here. What if someone spotted him? What if he accidentally activated a trap? He cautiously turned the doorknob, hearing it click open. He opened the door fully, seeing the dark living room with a sofa and comfortable chairs. He turned on the light, surprised that electricity still flowed in the circuits of the house. But it was all covered in a thick layer of dust. The owner has been gone for a long time, but why? He wondered. As he turned in the direction of the fireplace, he stopped short at what he saw. The first thing that caught his eye was the uniquely shaped kunai embedded in a stone slab placed on top of the fireplace. Every shinobi or to-be shinobi worth his or her salt would recognize the tri-pronged kunai. It was the Yondaim's kunai. He now knew that this house belonged to the deceased Hokage. Crap. He had just broken into the Yondaim's house. Double crap. He was just about to turn tail when Kurama's voice sounded in his head, what's that? He turned around again, seeing the portrait above the fireplace for the first time. It was Minato Namikaze, decked out in full Hokage uniform, along with a beautiful redhead wearing a high-collared, sleeveless blouse. Under a long, loose-fitting dress with a wristband on her left wrist and standard shinobi sandals. A medium-sized bulge on her stomach made him realize that she was pregnant. But that was not what caught his eye. The redhead was waving a peace sign, with a very familiar grin. The same one he wore whenever his mischievous tendencies surfaced or when he was really happy. Her face was also very similar looking to his own. Her exquisite violet eyes were shaped just like his eyes. With a jolt, the pieces of a puzzle that he could never solve arranged themselves, forming a long sought-after answer. Blonde hair, azure blue eyes, the familiar grin, same shaped face, identically shaped eyes. He had just found out the identities of his parents. Congratulations, kid. You finally found them. Kurama's smooth voice was softer this time.